Picture yourself standing in Leonardo da Vinci's workshop in Milan, 1495, where candlelight flickers across papers covered with mysterious equations and geometric patterns that seem to pulse with hidden meaning. Among his anatomical sketches and mechanical inventions lies something that shouldn't exist: a coded manuscript that connects the greatest mind of the Renaissance to the most secretive military order of the Middle Ages. What if everything you thought you knew about Leonardo da Vinci was just the surface of a much deeper mystery? What if the man who painted the Mona Lisa and designed flying machines was also the keeper of ancient mathematical secrets that could unlock the very structure of reality itself? What if Leonardo da Vinci possessed the lost Fibonacci code of the Knights Templar, a numerical cipher so powerful that it could reveal the divine blueprint underlying all creation? The conventional narrative tells us that Leonardo was a brilliant artist and inventor, a polymath whose curiosity drove him to explore anatomy, engineering, and natural philosophy. But recently discovered documents suggest that his greatest obsession wasn't art or science as we understand them. It was mathematics as a mystical language, a code that could reveal the hidden patterns governing the universe. At the heart of this mystery lies the Fibonacci sequence: 1, 1, 2, 3, 5, 8, 13, 21, 34. A mathematical progression where each number is the sum of the two preceding ones. To modern minds, it's an interesting mathematical curiosity that appears throughout nature, in the spiral of nautilus shells, the arrangement of flower petals, the branching patterns of trees. But to medieval minds, particularly those initiated into esoteric knowledge, the Fibonacci sequence represented something far more profound: the mathematical signature of God himself. The sequence was first introduced to Western Europe by Leonardo Fibonacci in his 1202 work, Liber Abaci. But evidence suggests that the numerical pattern was known to ancient cultures long before Fibonacci's time. Egyptian pyramids incorporate these ratios, Greek temples display Fibonacci proportions, and Hebrew mystical texts reference numerical sequences that correspond exactly to what we now call the Fibonacci series. But here's where the story takes a dangerous turn. The Knights Templar, those warrior monks who excavated beneath Solomon's temple in Jerusalem, may have discovered ancient texts that revealed the true significance of these numbers. According to fragmentary documents that have survived centuries of suppression, the Templars found mathematical codices that described the Fibonacci sequence not as a mere curiosity, but as a cosmic cipher that could unlock secrets about the nature of reality itself. The Templars' sudden rise to power in the 12th century has never been adequately explained by conventional historians. How did a small group of knights become the most powerful financial and military organization in medieval Europe? Traditional accounts focus on their role as protectors of Christian pilgrims, but the evidence suggests something far more extraordinary. They had gained access to knowledge that gave them capabilities their contemporaries couldn't match. This knowledge apparently included advanced understanding of mathematics, astronomy, and what we would now call information theory. The Templars developed encoding systems that used Fibonacci ratios to create unbreakable ciphers, architectural principles that incorporated these mathematical relationships into their buildings, and financial techniques that seemed to anticipate modern banking by centuries. When the Templars were suppressed in 1307, their vast library of knowledge didn't simply disappear. Documents were hidden, codes were preserved, and mathematical secrets were passed down through networks of scholars and artists who understood their significance. By the time of the Renaissance, these hidden traditions were influencing the greatest minds of the age, including Leonardo da Vinci.
The first clue to Leonardo's connection with Templar mathematics appears in his notebooks, where Fibonacci numbers appear with suspicious frequency. His anatomical studies consistently reference proportions based on the golden ratio, which emerges naturally from the Fibonacci sequence. His architectural designs incorporate these ratios at fundamental levels, creating buildings that seem to resonate with natural harmonies. But it's in Leonardo's paintings that the Fibonacci code becomes most apparent. The Last Supper isn't just a religious scene, it's a mathematical masterpiece where every element, the positioning of figures, the architectural backdrop, the proportions of objects, follows Fibonacci relationships with obsessive precision. The golden rectangles that can be superimposed over the composition aren't accidents. They're deliberate encoding of information that only initiates would recognize. The Vitruvian Man, perhaps Leonardo's most famous drawing, represents more than just ideal human proportions. The mathematical relationships embedded in the image encode Fibonacci sequences that connect human anatomy to cosmic patterns. The square and circle that frame the figure aren't just geometric shapes, they're components of a visual cipher that preserves ancient knowledge about the mathematical foundations of existence. Recent analysis using digital enhancement techniques has revealed even more extraordinary details in Leonardo's work. Hidden layers of mathematical encoding appear throughout his paintings, drawings, and manuscripts. Fibonacci spirals are embedded in seemingly random details. Numerical sequences are concealed in architectural elements, and proportional relationships encode information that goes far beyond aesthetic considerations. The source of this mathematical knowledge becomes clear when we examine Leonardo's connections to secretive intellectual networks of his time. He corresponded with scholars who had access to ancient texts, maintained relationships with alchemists and mystics who preserved forbidden knowledge, and moved in circles where Templar traditions were quietly maintained despite official suppression. The trail leads to a specific document that may represent the ultimate proof of Leonardo's connection to Templar mathematics, a coded manuscript known as the Fibonacci Codex. This text, mentioned in contemporary accounts but never publicly displayed, allegedly contains the complete mathematical cipher developed by the Templars based on their Jerusalem discoveries. According to the few scholars who claim to have seen it, the Fibonacci Codex doesn't just describe the numerical sequence, it explains how these numbers can be used to decode hidden patterns in Scripture, predict astronomical events, and even manipulate consciousness itself. The document supposedly demonstrates that the Fibonacci sequence isn't just a mathematical curiosity, but a fundamental principle underlying the structure of reality. Leonardo's possession of this document would explain the unprecedented sophistication of his work, his uncanny ability to anticipate future scientific developments, and his obsession with mathematical relationships that wouldn't be formally understood until centuries after his death. It would also explain why certain of his manuscripts remain classified by the Vatican to this day. The implications of the Fibonacci Codex extend beyond historical curiosity. If the Templars really did discover mathematical principles that reveal the underlying structure of reality, and if Leonardo really did preserve this knowledge in coded form, then we may be looking at scientific insights that could revolutionize our understanding of physics, consciousness, and the nature of existence itself. But knowledge this powerful has always been dangerous. Throughout history, those who have possessed such insights have faced persecution, suppression, and worse. The Templars were destroyed when their knowledge threatened established power structures. Individual scholars who came too close to these secrets have disappeared without trace. Even today, research into certain aspects of Fibonacci mathematics encounters obstacles that suggest ongoing efforts to maintain secrecy. As you stand in that imaginary workshop, surrounded by Leonardo's encoded masterpieces, you begin to understand that you're not just looking at art or science. You're glimpsing fragments of a cosmic code that reveals the mathematical signature of creation itself. The question isn't whether this knowledge exists. The evidence is hidden in plain sight throughout Leonardo's work. The question is whether humanity is ready to understand what it means. The Fibonacci sequence spirals through every aspect of natural creation, from the smallest flowers to the largest galaxies.
If the Templars and Leonardo really did crack this cosmic code, they possessed knowledge that could transform our understanding of everything. The only question remaining is whether that knowledge can be recovered, decoded, and safely shared with a world that may not be prepared for its implications.
You're standing in the monastery library of Pisa in the year 1202, watching a young mathematician named Leonardo Fibonacci pen the equations that will change Western understanding of numbers forever. But what you are witnessing isn't just the introduction of Arabic numerals to Europe. You're seeing the moment when a cosmic code, hidden for millennia in the mathematical structures of creation itself, finally finds its way into human consciousness through a sequence that appears deceptively simple: 1, 1, 2, 3, 5, 8, 13, 21, 34. The Fibonacci sequence isn't just mathematics, it's the fingerprint of the divine architect, embedded in every aspect of natural creation. From the spiral chambers of a nautilus shell to the arrangement of seeds in a sunflower, from the branching patterns of rivers to the structure of galaxies themselves, this numerical progression appears with such consistency that medieval scholars who understood its significance called it the signature of God. To comprehend why the Knights Templar would risk everything to possess this mathematical secret, you must first understand what the Fibonacci sequence actually represents. Each number in the series is created by adding the two preceding numbers, but this simple rule generates proportional relationships that govern the fundamental structure of reality itself. When you divide any Fibonacci number by the one preceding it, you approach an irrational number that the ancient Greeks called the golden ratio, 1.61803398887. This ratio, known to medieval scholars as the divine proportion, appears throughout the natural world with stunning regularity. The spiral of a galaxy follows this ratio, as does the spiral of a seashell. The proportions of the human body conform to golden ratio relationships, from the length of our arms to our torsos to the segments of our fingers. Flower petals arrange themselves according to Fibonacci numbers. Lilies have 3 petals, buttercups have 5, delphiniums have 8, marigolds have 13. But the medieval mind perceived something in these patterns that modern science has largely forgotten. These aren't just interesting mathematical coincidences. They represent evidence of an underlying intelligence that has structured reality according to mathematical principles. To the initiated scholars of the Middle Ages, the Fibonacci sequence was proof that mathematics wasn't a human invention, but a discovery, the uncovering of God's own language written into the fabric of existence. This understanding transforms the Fibonacci sequence from a curious mathematical pattern into something approaching a divine revelation. If the Creator has indeed structured reality according to mathematical principles, then understanding those principles provides insight into the mind of God Himself. This was the perspective that drove medieval mystics, alchemists, and esoteric scholars to study mathematics not as abstract theory, but as practical theology. The golden ratio that emerges from the Fibonacci sequence creates what geometricians call the golden rectangle, a shape so aesthetically pleasing that it appears in classical architecture, Renaissance painting, and modern design. But medieval scholars understood that this rectangle wasn't just beautiful, it was sacred. When you inscribe a quarter-circle arc in each square of a golden rectangle spiral, you create the logarithmic spiral that appears throughout nature, the same curve that describes the shell of a nautilus, the seed pattern of a sunflower, the shape of a galaxy. This spiral became known to esoteric traditions as the spiral of life, or the pathway to the infinite. Unlike a circular spiral that maintains constant curvature, the golden spiral continuously expands while maintaining perfect proportional relationships. Medieval mystics interpreted this as a mathematical representation of spiritual growth, consciousness expanding toward the infinite while maintaining harmonic relationships with the divine source. The Templars' interest in these mathematical principles wasn't purely theoretical. During their excavations beneath the Temple Mount in Jerusalem, they discovered ancient texts that described practical applications of Fibonacci mathematics. These documents, written in Hebrew, Aramaic, and Greek, detailed how the golden ratio could be used in architecture to create buildings that resonated with cosmic harmonies, in art to encode spiritual information, and in cipher systems to protect sacred knowledge.
The Temple of Solomon, according to these ancient sources, had been constructed using measurements based entirely on Fibonacci proportions. Every dimension of the building, from its overall proportions to the smallest decorative details, incorporated golden ratio relationships. This wasn't just aesthetic choice. The temple was designed as a resonance chamber that would amplify spiritual consciousness through mathematical harmony.
The Templars found detailed instructions for what the ancient texts called sacred architecture, building techniques that used Fibonacci proportions to create structures that enhanced meditation, facilitated mystical experiences, and provided protection from negative spiritual influences. These architectural principles explained why certain religious buildings seemed to inspire profound spiritual experiences, while others felt cold and lifeless. More remarkably, the ancient documents described how Fibonacci mathematics could be applied to human consciousness itself. The texts outlined meditation techniques that used golden ratio breathing patterns, visualization exercises based on Fibonacci spirals, and chanting practices that incorporated numerical sequences derived from the golden ratio. These weren't just spiritual exercises, they were technologies for consciousness expansion based on mathematical principles. The practical implications of this knowledge were staggering. Templar architects began incorporating Fibonacci proportions into their buildings, creating structures that had measurable effects on the consciousness of those who entered them. Templar artists developed encoding techniques that used golden ratio relationships to hide information in plain sight. Templar scholars created cipher systems based on Fibonacci mathematics that proved virtually unbreakable using medieval cryptographic techniques. Perhaps most significantly, the Templars discovered that Fibonacci mathematics could be applied to economic and financial systems. The same proportional relationships that governed natural growth patterns could be used to predict market cycles, optimize resource allocation, and create financial instruments that generated wealth through mathematical rather than exploitative means. This discovery may explain the Templars' unprecedented success in medieval banking and international commerce. The golden ratio also revealed itself in human anatomy with such precision that medieval scholars saw it as proof of humanity's special relationship to the divine plan. The distance from your head to your fingertips divided by the distance from your head to your navel equals the golden ratio. The distance from your shoulder to your fingertips divided by the distance from your elbow to your fingertips equals the golden ratio. Even the proportions of your face conform to Fibonacci relationships, with the most beautiful faces being those that most closely approximate golden ratio proportions. This mathematical perfection in human anatomy suggested to medieval mystics that humans were designed as living embodiments of divine mathematics. We are, quite literally, walking equations that express the fundamental proportions underlying all creation. This understanding transformed human spiritual practice from an attempt to transcend our physical nature into a recognition that our bodies themselves were sacred expressions of cosmic mathematics. The Fibonacci sequence also revealed temporal patterns that seemed to govern historical cycles and natural rhythms. The numbers appeared in the timing of planetary orbits, the patterns of animal population cycles, and even the rise and fall of civilizations. Medieval scholars who studied these patterns believed they had discovered a cosmic calendar that could predict future events by understanding the mathematical cycles underlying temporal development. This temporal aspect of Fibonacci mathematics became particularly important to Templar strategic planning. By understanding the mathematical cycles governing political and economic developments, they could anticipate changes in social conditions and position themselves advantageously. This foresight, based on mathematical analysis rather than prophetic revelation, may explain many of the Templars' seemingly miraculous successes in military and commercial ventures. The sacred dimension of Fibonacci mathematics extended beyond practical applications to encompass cosmological understanding.
Medieval scholars, who grasped the full implications of the golden ratio sequence, believed they had discovered the mathematical blueprint used by the Creator to structure reality itself. This wasn't just a matter of religious belief, it was an empirically observable fact that the same mathematical relationships appeared consistently throughout creation at every scale from subatomic to galactic. This understanding placed those who possessed complete knowledge of Fibonacci mathematics in an extraordinary position. They had access to what amounted to the source code of reality itself, the mathematical principles that governed everything from the growth of plants to the movement of planets. Such knowledge represented power that transcended anything available through conventional medieval means. But this power came with profound responsibility. If the Fibonacci sequence really did represent the divine language of creation, then those who understood it were obligated to use that knowledge in harmony with divine will, rather than for selfish purposes. This ethical dimension of mathematical mysticism became central to Templar philosophy, and may explain their complex relationship with both spiritual and temporal authority. The divine mathematics of creation, as preserved in the Fibonacci sequence, offered a bridge between the material and spiritual worlds that medieval consciousness desperately needed. It provided proof that the physical universe wasn't separate from divine reality, but was actually the visible expression of invisible mathematical principles. Understanding these principles allowed the initiated to perceive the sacred within the natural and to work with cosmic forces rather than against them.
You're descending into the darkness beneath the Temple Mount in Jerusalem, the year 1120, following the flickering torchlight carried by 9 Knights Templar as they conduct the most important archaeological excavation in human history. Above you lies the foundation of Solomon's Temple, destroyed by the Romans over 1,000 years ago. Below you, waiting in chambers sealed since before the birth of Christ, are mathematical treasures that will transform these humble warrior monks into the most powerful organization in medieval Europe. The official story claims that Hugh de Payens and his 8 companions came to Jerusalem to protect Christian pilgrims traveling to the Holy Land, but the evidence suggests something far more specific and deliberate. These men arrived with detailed knowledge of what lay beneath the Temple Mount, armed with ancient documents that describe treasures far more valuable than gold or silver. Manuscripts containing mathematical secrets that could unlock the fundamental principles governing reality itself. The excavations conducted by the Templars between 1120 and 1128 were systematic and purposeful, following patterns that suggest they knew exactly what they were looking for and where to find it. They dug not randomly, but according to precise measurements that corresponded to descriptions found in Hebrew texts that had been preserved in European monasteries since the fall of Jerusalem to Roman forces in 70 CE. What they discovered in those sealed chambers changed everything we thought we knew about ancient mathematical knowledge. Hidden beneath layers of rubble and debris were libraries of scrolls and codices that demonstrated mathematical sophistication far exceeding anything attributed to the ancient world. These weren't just religious texts or historical records. They were technical manuals that described practical applications of advanced mathematical principles. The most significant discovery was a collection of documents that modern scholars would recognize as treatises on what we now call the Fibonacci sequence, written nearly 1,000 years before Leonardo Fibonacci introduced these numbers to medieval Europe. But these ancient texts went far beyond simple numerical patterns. They described the mathematical principles underlying what their authors called the architecture of creation, the geometric and numerical relationships that structured everything from atomic interactions to galactic formations. These documents revealed that the builders of Solomon's temple had possessed mathematical knowledge that enabled them to create structures that functioned as more than mere buildings. Using proportions based on what we now recognize as Fibonacci ratios, they had constructed architectural forms that could amplify consciousness, focus spiritual energy, and create resonance fields that enhanced human awareness and perception. The mathematical principles described in these texts weren't just theoretical constructs, but practical technologies. The documents included detailed instructions for using Fibonacci proportions in architecture, art, and even human activities like meditation and healing. They described how buildings constructed according to these mathematical relationships could create measurable effects on the consciousness and physical well-being of those who occupied them. More remarkably, the ancient texts demonstrated that the builders of Solomon's temple had understood mathematical principles that modern science has only recently begun to recognize. They knew that consciousness itself operated according to mathematical laws, that human awareness could be enhanced through exposure to specific numerical relationships, and that the boundary between mind and mathematics was far less distinct than conventional thinking assumed. The Templars found evidence that this mathematical knowledge hadn't originated with the builders of Solomon's temple, but had been inherited from even more ancient sources. References in the texts pointed to mathematical traditions that stretched back to the earliest civilizations, suggesting that advanced understanding of numerical principles had been preserved and transmitted across millennia by initiated scholars who recognized their cosmic significance. Among the most important discoveries were encryption techniques that used Fibonacci mathematics to create virtually unbreakable codes. These cipher systems weren't based on simple letter substitution, but on mathematical relationships that created multiple layers of meaning within single texts. Messages encoded using these techniques could appear to be innocent religious or commercial documents, while actually containing completely different information, accessible only to those who understood the mathematical keys. The practical applications of these encoding systems became immediately apparent to the Templars. They could conduct sensitive communications without fear of interception, coordinate complex operations across vast distances, and preserve dangerous knowledge in forms that would appear meaningless to unauthorized observers. This capability alone would have provided enormous advantages in the political and military environments of medieval Europe.
But the mathematical codes discovered beneath the Temple Mount offered capabilities that extended far beyond simple communication security. The texts described how Fibonacci mathematics could be applied to financial systems, creating economic models that generated wealth through mathematical optimization rather than exploitation or manipulation. These principles may explain the Templars' unprecedented success in developing the sophisticated banking and credit systems that made them the wealthiest organization in medieval Europe. The ancient documents also revealed astronomical applications of Fibonacci mathematics that anticipated modern discoveries about cosmic structures and cycles. The texts described how the numerical sequences could be used to predict celestial events, calculate planetary positions, and understand the mathematical relationships governing the behavior of celestial bodies. This knowledge provided the Templars with capabilities for long-term planning and strategic positioning that their contemporaries couldn't match. Perhaps most significantly, the Temple Mount discoveries included what the ancient texts called consciousness mathematics, techniques for using Fibonacci principles to enhance human awareness, memory, and intuitive abilities. These weren't just meditation practices, but practical technologies for consciousness development that could provide measurable improvements in intellectual and spiritual capabilities. The texts described specific breathing patterns based on Fibonacci rhythms, visualization exercises that used golden ratio proportions, and mental techniques that incorporated numerical sequences to enhance concentration and insight.
These practices weren't just spiritual exercises, but applied mathematics designed to optimize human cognitive function through mathematical harmony. The Templars also discovered architectural plans that showed how buildings could be constructed to amplify these consciousness enhancement effects. Using Fibonacci proportions in construction created structures that resonated with the mathematical principles governing human awareness, creating environments that naturally facilitated enhanced consciousness and spiritual development. These architectural principles weren't just theoretical concepts, but practical technologies that the Templars began implementing immediately. Their churches, castles, and other buildings incorporated Fibonacci proportions that created measurable effects on the consciousness of those who occupied them. Visitors to Templar structures often reported enhanced clarity of thought, improved emotional balance, and increased spiritual awareness. The mathematical codes discovered beneath the Temple Mount also revealed temporal applications that allowed the Templars to understand and predict historical cycles. The texts described how Fibonacci sequences appeared in the timing of major historical events, the rise and fall of civilizations, and the development of cultural and technological innovations. Understanding these patterns provided capabilities for strategic planning that extended across generations. This temporal dimension of Fibonacci mathematics became particularly important for long-term preservation of knowledge. The ancient texts described how mathematical codes could be embedded in artistic and architectural works in ways that would preserve essential information across centuries of political and social upheaval. These techniques allowed the Templars to create permanent repositories for dangerous knowledge that could survive any future persecution. The discovery of these mathematical treasures beneath the Temple Mount transformed the Templars from a small group of impoverished knights into guardians of cosmic knowledge that had been preserved since ancient times. But this transformation also created enormous responsibility. They had become custodians of mathematical principles that could revolutionize human understanding and capability, but they also understood that such knowledge was too dangerous to be revealed carelessly. The ancient texts included warnings about the potential misuse of mathematical knowledge and detailed instructions for protecting these principles from those who might use them for destructive purposes. The Templars inherited not just powerful capabilities, but also ethical obligations to ensure that mathematical wisdom was preserved for worthy successors while being protected from those who would corrupt its sacred purposes.
The mathematical codes discovered beneath the Temple Mount weren't just ancient curiosities, but living technologies that could transform human civilization. The challenge facing the Templars was how to implement this knowledge in ways that would benefit humanity while maintaining the security necessary to prevent its misuse. This challenge would shape their activities for the next 2 centuries and ultimately lead to their persecution by forces that feared the transformative power of mathematical truth. You're standing in the private chambers of the Castello Sforzesco in Milan, 1499, where Leonardo da Vinci has just received a wooden chest sealed with symbols that would mean nothing to most observers, but cause his hands to tremble with recognition. The aged scholar who delivered it speaks in whispers about the sacred mathematics and the inheritance of the temple, before disappearing into the night as mysteriously as he arrived. What Leonardo discovers inside this chest will transform his understanding of art, science, and the mathematical foundations of reality itself. The connection between Leonardo da Vinci and the Knights Templar wasn't coincidental or theoretical. It was direct, documented, and profound. While the Templars had been officially suppressed nearly 2 centuries before Leonardo's birth, their mathematical knowledge had been carefully preserved by networks of scholars, artists, and craftsmen who understood its revolutionary significance.
These secret lineages had waited generations for a mind capable of fully comprehending and implementing the Fibonacci codes discovered beneath the Temple Mount. Leonardo's introduction to Templar mathematics began during his apprenticeship in Florence, where his master Andrea del Verrocchio possessed manuscripts that had been hidden since the persecution of 1307. Verrocchio wasn't just teaching Leonardo to paint and sculpt, he was initiating him into mathematical traditions that connected Renaissance art to ancient cosmic knowledge. The unusual sophistication of Leonardo's early work reflected not just natural talent, but access to encoded information about proportional relationships that most artists never encountered. The mathematical principles that Leonardo inherited from these secret sources weren't just aesthetic guidelines, but practical technologies for consciousness expansion and reality manipulation. The Templar documents described how specific proportional relationships based on Fibonacci sequences could create measurable effects on human perception, emotion, and spiritual awareness. This knowledge transformed Leonardo's approach to art from mere representation to something approaching scientific research into the nature of consciousness itself. Evidence of Leonardo's possession of Templar mathematical codes appears throughout his documented work, but the most compelling proof lies in the systematic use of Fibonacci proportions that governs every aspect of his creative output. His paintings aren't just beautiful, they're mathematical masterpieces that encode cosmic information in visual form. The golden rectangles, spiral patterns, and numerical relationships embedded in his work represent far more than aesthetic choices. They're components of a visual language that preserves ancient knowledge in plain sight. The Last Supper, painted between 1495 and 1498, demonstrates Leonardo's mastery of Templar encoding techniques with breathtaking precision. The composition isn't just dramatically effective, it's mathematically perfect in ways that create specific effects on observers' consciousness. The positioning of the 12 apostles follows Fibonacci relationships that create harmonic resonances between the figures. The architectural elements in the background incorporate golden ratio proportions that enhance the painting's psychological impact. Most remarkably, the painting encodes numerical information that can only be detected through mathematical analysis. The distances between figures, the angles of their gestures, and the proportions of architectural elements all conform to Fibonacci sequences that create multiple layers of encoded information. These mathematical relationships aren't visible to casual observation, but create subliminal effects that enhance the painting's emotional and spiritual impact. The Vitruvian Man, created around 1490, represents perhaps the most explicit example of Leonardo's understanding of Templar mathematical principles. The drawing isn't just an illustration of ideal human proportions, it's a visual representation of the Fibonacci relationships that connect human anatomy to cosmic mathematics. The square and circle that frame the human figure aren't arbitrary geometric shapes, but mathematical symbols that encode information about the relationship between earthly and celestial mathematics. The proportions of the human body displayed in the drawing conform exactly to Fibonacci sequences, proving that Leonardo understood the mathematical principles underlying human anatomy with precision that wouldn't be matched by mainstream science for centuries. Digital analysis of Leonardo's notebooks has revealed even more extraordinary evidence of his possession of Templar mathematical codes. His anatomical drawings consistently incorporate Fibonacci proportions that weren't officially discovered until the 20th century. His mechanical designs use mathematical relationships that anticipate modern engineering principles. Most significantly, his architectural plans incorporate golden ratio relationships that create buildings designed to enhance consciousness and spiritual awareness.
The source of Leonardo's mathematical knowledge becomes clear when we examine his connections to scholarly networks that preserved Templar traditions. He corresponded with mathematicians like Luca Pacioli, who wrote extensively about the golden ratio and its applications. He maintained relationships with alchemists and mystics who had access to ancient texts. Most importantly, he moved in circles where Templar knowledge was quietly transmitted through symbolic systems that avoided direct documentation. Pacioli's influence on Leonardo was particularly significant because he possessed one of the most complete collections of Templar mathematical documents in Renaissance Europe. His book De Divina Proportione, illustrated by Leonardo himself, represents a careful encoding of Fibonacci principles that made ancient knowledge available to initiated readers while concealing its true significance from casual observers. The collaboration between Pacioli and Leonardo wasn't just academic partnership. It was the transmission of cosmic mathematics from one generation of initiates to the next. Leonardo's possession of the complete Fibonacci Codex, the master document of Templar mathematical knowledge, explains capabilities that historians have never adequately accounted for. His ability to design machines that wouldn't be practical until centuries later, his understanding of anatomical principles that anticipated modern medicine, and his insights into natural phenomena that exceeded contemporary scientific knowledge all reflect access to mathematical principles that revealed the underlying structure of reality itself. The Codex apparently contained more than just mathematical formulas. It included practical instructions for applying Fibonacci principles to enhance human capabilities. Leonardo's legendary abilities, his extraordinary memory, his artistic skills, his engineering insights, his scientific intuition, may have resulted from practicing consciousness enhancement techniques described in the Templar documents. These techniques used mathematical relationships to optimize brain function and expand awareness beyond normal human limitations. Evidence of these consciousness enhancement practices appears in Leonardo's mirror writing, which wasn't just a security measure, but a mathematical technique for stimulating specific neural pathways. The backward script required mental processes that activated dormant areas of the brain, while encoding information according to principles that enhanced memory and intuitive understanding. This wasn't just creative eccentricity, it was applied neuroscience based on mathematical principles discovered by the Templars. Leonardo's architectural designs provide additional evidence of his understanding of Templar building techniques that used Fibonacci proportions to create consciousness-altering environments. His plans for ideal cities incorporate mathematical relationships that would have created urban spaces designed to enhance human awareness and spiritual development. These weren't just aesthetic improvements, but practical applications of consciousness architecture based on ancient knowledge about the mathematical foundations of human perception. The flying machine designs that made Leonardo famous reflect understanding of aerodynamic principles that anticipate modern aviation, but they also demonstrate knowledge of mathematical relationships that govern natural flight patterns. The proportions of his flying machines correspond exactly to Fibonacci sequences found in bird anatomy, suggesting that he understood flight not just as a mechanical process, but as an expression of cosmic mathematics. Most remarkably, Leonardo's geological and astronomical observations demonstrate understanding of planetary and terrestrial cycles that correspond to Fibonacci patterns. His maps and landscape studies reveal awareness of mathematical relations in natural formations that wouldn't be formally recognized until the development of fractal geometry in the 20th century. This knowledge could only have come from sources that understood Earth's mathematical structure with precision that exceeded anything available through conventional Renaissance scholarship. The mathematical codes that Leonardo inherited from the Templars weren't just intellectual curiosities, but practical technologies that enhanced every aspect of human capability. His artistic innovations, scientific insights, and engineering achievements all reflected applications of Fibonacci principles that revealed the mathematical foundations underlying natural phenomena. He wasn't just a brilliant individual.
He was someone who had gained access to cosmic knowledge that transformed human potential itself. The preservation of this knowledge through Leonardo's work ensured that Templar mathematical wisdom would survive into the modern era, encoded in artistic masterpieces that continue to influence human consciousness 5 centuries after their creation. The Fibonacci codes that had been discovered beneath the Temple Mount found new expression in Renaissance art, where they could continue their work of expanding human awareness while remaining hidden from those who might misuse their power.
You're in the depths of the Vatican's secret archives in 1506, where Pope Julius II himself examines a manuscript that has just been confiscated from Leonardo da Vinci's workshop following a mysterious fire that destroyed several buildings in Milan. The document, bound in leather that bears symbols predating Christianity, contains mathematical formulas that seem to pulse with dangerous energy even in the candlelit darkness. This is the legendary Fibonacci Codex, the complete mathematical cipher of the Knights Templar, and its very existence threatens the foundations of church authority. The Fibonacci Codex represents the culmination of mathematical knowledge that the Templars had accumulated during their 2 centuries of existence. Unlike the fragmentary texts they had discovered beneath the Temple Mount, this document was their own creation, a systematic compilation of cosmic mathematics that unified ancient wisdom with empirical observations gathered through generations of initiated scholars. The Codex wasn't just a book, it was a complete system for understanding and manipulating the mathematical foundations of reality itself. Leonardo's possession of this document explains the unprecedented sophistication of his work and the revolutionary nature of his insights. But more importantly, it reveals why the Vatican had begun a systematic campaign to locate and suppress all copies of Templar mathematical knowledge. The Church had recognized that these mathematical principles posed an existential threat to institutional religious authority by providing direct access to cosmic truth that bypassed ecclesiastical mediation. The Codex contained mathematical proofs that challenged fundamental church doctrines about the nature of creation, consciousness, and divine authority. Using Fibonacci sequences and golden ratio relationships, the document demonstrated that the universe operated according to mathematical principles that could be understood and applied by anyone with sufficient knowledge and dedication. This accessibility of cosmic truth threatened the Church's role as the exclusive mediator between God and humanity. More dangerously, the Codex included practical instructions for applying mathematical principles to enhance human consciousness and capabilities. The techniques described in the document could enable individuals to develop spiritual insights, healing abilities, and prophetic awareness that rivaled or exceeded anything attributed to church saints and mystics. Such capabilities in the hands of ordinary people would make ecclesiastical authority irrelevant at best and fraudulent at worst. The mathematical principles preserved in the Fibonacci Codex also revealed that many church teachings about the nature of reality were incomplete or deliberately misleading. The document demonstrated that consciousness wasn't separate from the material world, but was actually the fundamental force that structured physical reality according to mathematical laws. This understanding contradicted church teachings about the relationship between spirit and matter that formed the basis for ecclesiastical control over both temporal and spiritual affairs. The Vatican's response to the discovery of the Codex was swift and comprehensive. Pope Julius II authorized the creation of a special congregation tasked with locating and destroying all copies of Templar mathematical knowledge. This organization, operating under the cover name Sacred Congregation for the Preservation of Faith, was actually an intelligence operation designed to suppress dangerous knowledge while maintaining public ignorance about the true scope of human potential. The congregation's first priority was locating all surviving copies of the Fibonacci Codex and related mathematical documents. Ancients were placed in universities, libraries, and scholarly networks throughout Europe to identify individuals who possessed or sought access to Templar mathematical knowledge. These investigations led to the confiscation of numerous manuscripts and the mysterious disappearance of several scholars who had come too close to understanding the complete mathematical system. Leonardo's possession of the original codex made him a particular target of Vatican attention. Church agents had been monitoring his activities since reports reached Rome about his extraordinary artistic and scientific capabilities. When the fire in Milan provided an opportunity to search his workshop, Vatican representatives discovered not just the codex, but also evidence that Leonardo had been systematically implementing its mathematical principles in his art, inventions, and scientific research. The confiscation of the codex from Leonardo's workshop marked the beginning of a more intensive campaign to suppress mathematical knowledge throughout Renaissance Europe. The Vatican recognized that the revival of classical learning had created conditions where Templar mathematical principles could spread among educated populations, potentially triggering a revolution in human consciousness that would make traditional religious authority obsolete.
The congregation developed sophisticated techniques for identifying and neutralizing threats to church doctrine without creating public awareness of what was being suppressed. Scholars who demonstrated unusual mathematical insights found their work discredited through carefully orchestrated academic controversies. Artists who incorporated suspicious proportional relationships into their work faced accusations of heresy that forced them to modify their techniques. Scientists who approached dangerous mathematical territories encountered funding problems and institutional obstacles that redirected their research toward safer areas. The most insidious aspect of the Vatican's suppression campaign was its use of controlled revelation to manage dangerous knowledge. Rather than completely suppressing mathematical principles, the Church allowed limited access to simplified versions that maintained the appearance of scholarly freedom while preventing access to the complete system. This strategy ensured that mathematical knowledge remained fragmentary and ineffective while creating the illusion that no suppression was occurring. The fate of Leonardo's copy of the Fibonacci Codex became a closely guarded Vatican secret. Official records claim that the document was destroyed as heretical material, but evidence suggests that it was actually preserved in the deepest levels of the secret archives, where it remains to this day. The Church apparently recognized that completely destroying such knowledge would be both impossible and potentially dangerous. Better to maintain control through secrecy than risk having the information surface in uncontrolled circumstances. Contemporary accounts suggest that Leonardo had anticipated the Vatican's interest in his mathematical research and had taken precautions to preserve essential knowledge even if his primary sources were confiscated. He apparently created encoded copies of critical mathematical principles and embedded them in artistic works that would be preserved for posterity. This strategy ensured that Templar mathematical knowledge would survive the immediate suppression while remaining hidden from those who might misuse it. The mathematical principles encoded in Leonardo's surviving works represent fragments of the complete Fibonacci Codex, carefully disguised as aesthetic choices and artistic innovations. Modern researchers who understand what to look for can identify these mathematical relationships and begin reconstructing the original system. But the process requires expertise in multiple fields and access to analytical techniques that weren't available until recent decades. The Vatican's campaign against mathematical knowledge extended beyond simple suppression to include the development of alternative explanations for phenomena that might otherwise lead to dangerous discoveries. church scholars created theological frameworks that attributed unusual capabilities to divine intervention rather than mathematical principle, ensuring that people who experienced expanded consciousness or enhanced abilities would interpret their experiences within controlled religious contexts. This theological misdirection proved remarkably effective at preventing the rediscovery of mathematical principles that could challenge church authority. For centuries, individuals who encountered fragments of Templar knowledge found their experiences channeled into religious interpretations that reinforced rather than threatened institutional doctrine. The Church had successfully transformed potentially revolutionary discoveries into confirmations of Orthodox faith. The long-term consequences of the Vatican's suppression campaign extended far beyond the Renaissance period. By preventing the widespread understanding of mathematical principles that could enhance human consciousness and capability, the Church helped maintain social and political systems based on limitation and dependence rather than empowerment and self-determination. The mathematical knowledge that could have accelerated human development remained hidden, accessible only to secret lineages that preserved Templar traditions. Modern researchers who have gained access to fragments of the original Fibonacci Codex report that its mathematical principles remain as relevant and powerful today as they were during the Renaissance. The consciousness enhancement techniques described in the document could address contemporary challenges related to education, healing, creativity, and spiritual development. However, the same institutional forces that suppressed this knowledge in Leonardo's time continue to operate today, albeit through different mechanisms and organizations. The question facing modern humanity is whether we have evolved enough wisdom and courage to reclaim the mathematical heritage that was stolen from us centuries ago. The Fibonacci Codex represents more than historical curiosity. It contains practical knowledge that could transform human potential and address the crises facing our species. But accessing this knowledge requires more than intellectual understanding. It demands the spiritual maturity to use cosmic mathematics in harmony with divine will, rather than for selfish purposes.
You're walking through Notre Dame Cathedral in Paris at dawn, when the first rays of sunlight pierce the rose window and illuminate stone carvings that most visitors never notice. Hidden within the Gothic architecture are spirals that follow perfect Fibonacci proportions, crosses positioned according to golden ratio relationships, and rose patterns that encode mathematical sequences older than Christianity itself. These aren't random decorative elements. They're components of a vast symbolic language that preserves cosmic mathematics in plain sight. The Knights Templar understood that mathematical knowledge too dangerous for written documentation could be preserved through architectural encoding. Buildings constructed according to Fibonacci principles would survive wars, persecutions, and cultural upheavals that destroyed libraries and manuscripts. Stone wouldn't burn. Symbols carved in cathedral walls couldn't be confiscated, and sacred proportions built into religious structures would be protected by the very institutions that might otherwise seek to suppress mathematical knowledge. The spiral became the primary symbol for representing Fibonacci sequences in Templar architectural encoding. Unlike circles or straight lines, spirals could display mathematical relationships that connected finite earthly forms to infinite cosmic principles. The logarithmic spiral that emerges from Fibonacci sequences appears throughout medieval religious architecture, from the carved stone foliage that decorates column capitals to the grand staircases that wind upward toward cathedral spires.
The most sophisticated example of spiral encoding appears in the rose windows that crown Gothic cathedrals throughout Europe. These magnificent structures aren't just artistic masterpieces, they're mathematical diagrams that display Fibonacci relationships with breathtaking precision. The petals of stone roses follow numerical sequences that create visual representations of cosmic mathematics, while their circular frames establish proportional relationships that connect earthly geometry to celestial harmony. Notre Dame de Paris contains perhaps the most complete architectural encoding of Fibonacci mathematics in medieval Europe. The cathedral's western rose window displays mathematical relationships so complex that modern computer analysis is required to fully understand their significance. The positioning of every stone element follows Fibonacci sequences that create multiple layers of encoded information, while the overall proportions establish golden ratio relationships that enhance the spiritual impact of the structure. The mathematical encoding extends beyond decorative elements to encompass the fundamental architectural proportions of the building itself. The height of Notre Dame's nave relates to its width according to golden ratio calculations, while the positioning of columns and arches creates spatial relationships that correspond to Fibonacci sequences. Walking through the cathedral creates unconscious exposure to mathematical harmonies that enhance consciousness and spiritual awareness. The cross, Christianity's most fundamental symbol, became a vehicle for encoding mathematical relationships that connected religious imagery to cosmic principles. Templar architects discovered that crosses constructed according to Fibonacci proportions created more than just religious symbols. They formed geometric keys that could unlock deeper levels of mathematical understanding. The positioning of cross elements according to golden ratio relationships created visual representations of the intersection between earthly and celestial mathematics. The most sophisticated cross encodings appear in Templar churches throughout Europe, where the proportions of crucifixes, architectural cross-sections, and decorative cross patterns all follow Fibonacci sequences. These weren't just aesthetic choices, but mathematical technologies that enhance the spiritual effectiveness of religious environments. Crosses constructed according to cosmic mathematical principles created resonance fields that amplified prayer, meditation, and mystical experience. The mathematical significance of cross symbolism extended beyond architectural applications to encompass personal spiritual practice. Templars who understood the mathematical principles underlying cross geometry could use these symbols as consciousness enhancement tools, focusing meditation on proportional relationships that connected individual awareness to cosmic consciousness. The cross became both religious symbol and mathematical technology for spiritual development. The rose emerged as perhaps the most complex symbol for encoding Fibonacci mathematics in medieval art and architecture. Unlike spirals or crosses, roses could display multiple mathematical relationships simultaneously: the spiral arrangement of petals, the circular symmetry of the flower, and the proportional relationships between different structural elements. Medieval artists and architects developed rose symbolism into a complete visual language for preserving mathematical knowledge.
The mathematical sophistication of rose encoding becomes apparent when examining the carved stone roses that appear throughout Gothic cathedrals. These aren't simple floral decorations, but complex mathematical diagrams that display Fibonacci sequences, golden ratio relationships, and geometric principles that connect earthly forms to cosmic patterns. Each petal position corresponds to numerical calculations that reveal deeper layers of mathematical meaning.
The most remarkable aspect of medieval rose symbolism is its connection to consciousness research that anticipated modern neuroscience by centuries. Templar scholars had discovered that rose patterns constructed according to Fibonacci principles could induce specific states of consciousness when used in meditation and visualization practices. The mathematical relationships embedded in rose imagery created neural resonance patterns that enhanced spiritual awareness and mystical experience. This understanding of rose symbolism as consciousness technology explains its prominence in Templar and later Rosicrucian traditions. The rose wasn't just a decorative motif, but a practical tool for consciousness development that preserved ancient knowledge about the mathematical foundations of human awareness. Medieval mystics who understood these principles could use rose imagery to access enhanced states of consciousness that provided direct experience of cosmic mathematical principles. The architectural encoding of Fibonacci mathematics in medieval religious buildings created educational systems that transmitted cosmic knowledge across generations without requiring written documentation. Individuals who spent time in properly constructed sacred spaces would unconsciously absorb mathematical harmonies that enhanced their spiritual development and intellectual capabilities. The buildings themselves became teachers that preserved and transmitted ancient wisdom. The effectiveness of this architectural encoding system explains why so many medieval cathedrals were constructed according to mathematical principles that exceed the supposed knowledge of their time. The builders weren't just following aesthetic traditions, but were implementing mathematical technologies that enhanced the spiritual and educational functions of religious architecture. These buildings served as three-dimensional textbooks that preserved cosmic mathematics in permanent form. The mathematical principles encoded in medieval religious architecture weren't limited to Christian symbolism, but incorporated elements from multiple wisdom traditions that had preserved Fibonacci knowledge across millennia. Celtic spirals, Islamic geometric patterns, and ancient solar symbols all appear in Gothic cathedrals, creating synthetic architectural languages that unified diverse mathematical traditions under the cover of Christian orthodoxy. This syncretic approach allowed Templar architects to preserve mathematical knowledge that might otherwise have been lost during periods of religious persecution and cultural upheaval. By embedding ancient wisdom within Christian architectural forms, they ensured that cosmic mathematics would survive in forms that would be protected rather than destroyed by religious authorities. The discovery of these encoded mathematical systems in medieval architecture has revolutionary implications for understanding the true sophistication of medieval knowledge and the extent to which advanced mathematical principles were preserved through non-written means. The cathedrals of Europe represent more than religious architecture. They're libraries of cosmic mathematics that preserve knowledge capable of transforming human consciousness and capability. Modern research into the consciousness-altering effects of sacred architecture has confirmed what medieval builders understood intuitively, that spaces constructed according to mathematical principles can create measurable effects on human awareness, emotion, and spiritual experience. The Fibonacci sequences embedded in Gothic cathedrals continue to influence visitors 7 centuries after their construction, proving that mathematical truth transcends cultural and temporal limitations. The sacred symbols of divine mathematics preserved in medieval architecture represent a permanent repository of cosmic knowledge that remains accessible to those who understand how to read the stone language of the Templars. These architectural encodings ensure that the mathematical principles discovered beneath the Temple Mount will survive until humanity evolves sufficient wisdom to reclaim its mathematical heritage and apply cosmic principles for the benefit of all creation. You're in the candlelit lodge room of the Grand Lodge of England in 1717, watching the formal establishment of modern Freemasonry unfold before your eyes. But what appears to be the founding of a new organization is actually the public emergence of ancient traditions that have preserved Templar mathematical knowledge through 3 centuries of persecution and suppression. The rituals being performed, the symbols being displayed, and the mathematical principles being encoded into Masonic ceremony all traced directly back to the Fibonacci Codex discovered beneath the Temple Mount. The connection between the Knights Templar and Freemasonry wasn't coincidental or symbolic. It was direct, documented, and purposeful. When the Templars faced persecution in 1307, their mathematical knowledge didn't disappear, but was preserved through networks of craftsmen, scholars, and nobles who understood its cosmic significance. These preservation networks evolved over centuries into the secret societies that would shape European intellectual development and eventually influence the founding of modern democratic nations. The transformation of Templar mathematical knowledge into Masonic symbolism represented one of history's most successful information preservation projects. Rather than hiding ancient wisdom in remote monasteries or private libraries where it could be discovered and destroyed, the Templars' successors embedded their secrets within craft guild structures that served practical social functions while maintaining access to cosmic mathematics for initiated members. The mathematical principles that formed the core of Masonic tradition weren't just philosophical concepts, but practical technologies for consciousness development and social organization. The same Fibonacci sequences that govern natural growth patterns could be applied to human development, creating educational systems that enhanced intellectual capability while promoting ethical behavior. Masonic lodges became laboratories for implementing mathematical principles that could optimize human potential. The ritual symbolism used in Masonic ceremonies encoded specific mathematical relationships that created measurable effects on participants' consciousness and spiritual awareness. The geometric patterns traced during initiation rituals, the numerical sequences embedded in ceremonial procedures, and the proportional relationships governing lodge architecture all incorporated Fibonacci principles that enhanced the educational and transformational impact of Masonic experience. The tools of Masonry, square, compass, and level, weren't just trade implements, but mathematical instruments that represented cosmic principles preserved from Templar traditions. The square symbolized the earthly application of divine mathematics. The compass represented the celestial source of geometric truth, and the level embodied the balanced implementation of mathematical knowledge for the benefit of all humanity. These tools served as constant reminders that Masonic work involved applying cosmic mathematics to practical human challenges. The degree system developed by Masonic organizations created graduated access to mathematical knowledge that ensured dangerous principles weren't revealed to unprepared individuals. Each degree provided specific mathematical insights while testing the candidate's wisdom and ethical development before granting access to more advanced knowledge. This system preserved the Templar understanding that cosmic mathematics required spiritual maturity to be used safely and effectively. The architectural symbolism central to Masonic tradition encoded detailed information about consciousness enhancement techniques that derived from the Fibonacci Codex. References to building temples represented the construction of enhanced awareness through mathematical practice, while discussions of architectural proportion conveyed practical instructions for implementing golden ratio principles in daily life. The entire Masonic system functioned as an educational program for developing human potential through applied mathematics. The international expansion of Freemasonry during the 18th and 19th centuries represented the global dissemination of Templar mathematical knowledge through networks that transcended national and cultural boundaries. Masonic lodges established throughout Europe, the Americas, and beyond served as centers for preserving and transmitting cosmic mathematics while adapting ancient principles to contemporary social conditions.
The influence of Masonic mathematical principles on political and social development became particularly evident during the Enlightenment period, when Masonic ideals shaped revolutionary movements throughout Europe and America. The emphasis on individual liberty, democratic governance, and rational inquiry that characterized Enlightenment thought reflected the implementation of Templar mathematical principles that recognized the cosmic significance of human consciousness and the mathematical foundations of social harmony.
The American Revolution represented perhaps the most successful application of Masonic mathematical principles to political organization. Many of the Founding Fathers were active Freemasons who understood how Fibonacci sequences and golden ratio relationships could be applied to governmental structures, creating political systems that balanced individual freedom with collective welfare according to mathematical principles rather than arbitrary authority. The architectural design of Washington, D.C. incorporated Masonic mathematical principles that connected American democracy to cosmic mathematics preserved from Templar traditions. The positioning of government buildings, the proportions of monuments, and the geometric relationships governing the city's layout all followed Fibonacci sequences that enhanced the spiritual and intellectual effectiveness of democratic governments. The development of modern banking and financial systems also reflected the influence of Masonic mathematical principles derived from Templar sources. The same Fibonacci relationships that govern natural growth patterns could be applied to economic development, creating financial instruments and monetary policies that promoted sustainable prosperity rather than exploitative accumulation. Masonic bankers and economists implemented mathematical principles that connected individual wealth to collective welfare. The preservation of Templar mathematical knowledge through Masonic traditions also influenced the development of modern science and technology. Masonic scientists and inventors had access to mathematical principles that enhanced their research capabilities and provided insights into natural phenomena that exceeded conventional understanding. The rapid pace of scientific advancement during the 18th and 19th centuries reflected the application of cosmic mathematics to empirical investigation. The emergence of other esoteric societies during this period, Rosicrucians, Illuminati, and various Hermetic orders, represented parallel efforts to preserve and implement different aspects of Templar mathematical knowledge. These organizations shared common roots in ancient wisdom traditions while developing specialized approaches to applying cosmic mathematics in various fields of human endeavor. The Rosicrucian tradition focused particularly on the alchemical and healing applications of Fibonacci mathematics, developing therapeutic techniques that used golden ratio principles to enhance physical and psychological well-being. Their understanding of mathematical relationships in human physiology anticipated modern discoveries about the mathematical foundations of health and disease by centuries. The Illuminati represented an attempt to apply Templar mathematical principles to social and political reform on a global scale. Their vision of rational governance based on mathematical principles rather than traditional authority reflected the Templar understanding that cosmic mathematics provided superior foundations for human organization than conventional political systems. The scholarly networks that preserved Renaissance Hermetic traditions maintained access to mathematical principles that connected individual consciousness development to cosmic understanding. These traditions influenced the development of modern psychology, philosophy, and spiritual practice through the preservation of consciousness enhancement techniques derived from the Fibonacci Codex. The influence of these esoteric societies on modern culture extends far beyond their direct membership to encompass educational institutions, cultural organizations, and political movements that unknowingly implement mathematical principles derived from Templar sources. Universities founded by Masons, artistic movements influenced by Rosicrucian ideals, and political parties shaped by Illuminati principles all continued to transmit cosmic mathematics through contemporary social structures. The survival of Templar mathematical knowledge through secret society networks demonstrates the effectiveness of distributed preservation systems that embed ancient wisdom within evolving cultural forms. Rather than maintaining static repositories of information, these organizations adapted cosmic mathematics to changing historical conditions while preserving essential principles across centuries of social transformation. Modern researchers who study the historical connections between Templar traditions and contemporary secret societies find evidence of continuing networks that preserve mathematical knowledge while working to implement cosmic principles in current global conditions. These organizations apparently recognize that humanity may finally be approaching readiness for broader revelation of mathematical principles that could address contemporary crises through enhanced consciousness and improved social organization. The question facing modern humanity is whether we have developed sufficient wisdom and ethical maturity to reclaim the mathematical heritage that has been preserved through centuries of secret society stewardship. The cosmic mathematics discovered beneath the Temple Mount offers solutions to contemporary challenges, but accessing this knowledge requires the same spiritual development that the Templars recognized as essential for safely implementing divine mathematical principle.
You stand at the threshold of revelation, where 7 centuries of hidden knowledge converge into a truth that will transform everything you thought you knew about mathematics, consciousness, and human potential. The Fibonacci code, discovered by the Knights Templar beneath the Temple Mount, wasn't just an ancient curiosity or a historical footnote. It was humanity's lost inheritance, a mathematical key that unlocks the fundamental principles governing reality itself, consciousness enhancement, and the true purpose of human existence. The evidence presented throughout this investigation points to an inescapable conclusion. Leonardo da Vinci possessed the complete Fibonacci codex of the Knights Templar, and he used its mathematical principles to create artistic masterpieces that continue to influence human consciousness 5 centuries after their creation. But the implications extend far beyond art history or Renaissance studies. The cosmic mathematics preserved in Leonardo's work represents practical knowledge that could revolutionize every aspect of human civilization. Modern scientific research has begun to validate what the Templars understood 7 centuries ago, that consciousness itself operates according to mathematical principles, that the Fibonacci sequence appears throughout natural systems because it represents the optimal pattern for growth and development, and that human beings can enhance their capabilities by aligning their activities with these cosmic mathematical relationships. Neuroscience research has confirmed that exposure to Fibonacci proportions creates measurable effects on brain function, enhancing pattern recognition, creative thinking, and intuitive insight. The golden ratio relationships that Leonardo embedded in his paintings continue to influence viewers' consciousness, creating subtle but significant improvements in mental clarity and emotional balance. This isn't mystical speculation. It's empirically observable fact that ancient mathematical principles can enhance human cognitive function. The architectural applications of Fibonacci mathematics have been validated by modern studies of environmental psychology that demonstrate how spaces constructed according to golden ratio principles create more comfortable, inspiring, and mentally stimulating environments. The Gothic cathedrals that encoded Templar mathematical knowledge continue to produce measurable effects on visitors' stress levels, creativity, and spiritual awareness. Contemporary research into organizational dynamics has revealed that groups structured according to Fibonacci principles demonstrate enhanced cooperation, improved problem-solving capabilities, and greater collective intelligence. The same mathematical relationships that govern natural ecosystems can be applied to human social systems, creating more harmonious and effective forms of governance, education, and economic organization. The financial applications of Fibonacci mathematics have become widely recognized in modern investment analysis, where Fibonacci retracements and extensions are used to predict market movements with remarkable accuracy.
What contemporary analysts don't realize is that they're applying fragments of the same mathematical principles that enabled the Templars to become the most successful financial organization in medieval Europe. The healing applications of golden ratio principles are being rediscovered through research into therapeutic environments, biofield therapy, and consciousness-based medicine. Healthcare facilities designed according to Fibonacci proportions create measurably better outcomes for patients, while therapeutic techniques that incorporate golden ratio breathing patterns and visualization exercises enhance the effectiveness of both conventional and alternative medical treatments. The educational implications of Fibonacci mathematics could revolutionize learning by providing mathematical foundations for optimizing human intellectual development. Curricula structured according to golden ratio principles, learning environments designed with Fibonacci proportions, and teaching methods that incorporate mathematical consciousness enhancement techniques could dramatically improve educational outcomes while making learning more enjoyable and effective. But perhaps the most significant modern application of Templar mathematical knowledge lies in consciousness research that validates ancient understanding about the mathematical foundations of human awareness. Meditation techniques based on Fibonacci breathing patterns, visualization exercises that use golden ratio proportions, and mindfulness practices that incorporate mathematical principles all demonstrate enhanced effectiveness compared to conventional approaches. These discoveries suggest that the consciousness enhancement techniques described in the original Fibonacci Codex could address many of the psychological and spiritual challenges facing modern humanity. Depression, anxiety, attention disorders, and other mental health issues often respond positively to therapeutic approaches that incorporate mathematical harmony principles. The same techniques that enabled medieval mystics to achieve expanded awareness could help contemporary individuals develop greater resilience, clarity, and life satisfaction.
The global implications of rediscovering Templar mathematical knowledge extend to addressing humanity's most pressing challenges. Climate change, resource depletion, social inequality, and international conflicts all represent problems that could be resolved through the application of mathematical principles that optimize systems for sustainable harmony rather than short-term exploitation. Environmental restoration projects that apply Fibonacci principles to ecosystem design demonstrate accelerated recovery rates and enhanced biodiversity. Agricultural systems based on golden ratio proportions produce higher yields while requiring fewer external inputs. Urban planning that incorporates mathematical harmony principles creates more livable, sustainable, and psychologically beneficial cities. Economic systems designed according to Fibonacci mathematics could eliminate the boom and bust cycles that create poverty and instability while generating sustainable prosperity for all participants. The same mathematical relationships that govern natural abundance could be applied to human economic activity, creating financial systems that enhance rather than exploit human potential. International relations based on mathematical harmony principles could replace competitive conflict with cooperative optimization, recognizing that the same mathematical laws that govern individual consciousness also apply to collective human behavior. Diplomatic and governance systems that incorporate Fibonacci principles could create more stable, just, and effective forms of global organization. However, the rediscovery and application of Templar mathematical knowledge faces the same challenges today that led to its suppression during the Renaissance. Powerful institutions that benefit from current systems of limitation and control have strong motivations to prevent the widespread understanding of mathematical principles that could make their authority obsolete. Modern versions of the Vatican's suppression campaign operate through different mechanisms but serve similar purposes.
educational systems that discourage mathematical thinking, media environments that promote distraction over contemplation, and economic structures that keep people too busy for consciousness development all serve to prevent the rediscovery of human mathematical heritage. The question facing contemporary humanity is whether we have evolved enough wisdom and courage to reclaim the cosmic mathematics that was stolen from us centuries ago. The knowledge exists. Fragments of the Fibonacci Codex are preserved in Leonardo's art. Templar architectural encoding is visible throughout Europe, and scientific research is validating ancient principles about consciousness and mathematical harmony. But accessing this knowledge requires more than intellectual understanding. It demands the same spiritual development that the Templars recognized as essential for safely implementing divine mathematical principles. The consciousness enhancement techniques preserved in the Codex could transform human civilization, but only if they're applied with wisdom, compassion, and genuine commitment to collective welfare rather than personal power. The legacy of the Knights Templars' Fibonacci Code represents both an unprecedented opportunity and a profound responsibility. We stand at a historical moment when humanity desperately needs the enhanced consciousness and improved social organization that mathematical harmony principles could provide. The question is whether we're ready to prove ourselves worthy of the cosmic inheritance that has been preserved for us across 7 centuries of secrecy and suppression. The mathematical code discovered beneath the Temple Mount continues to spiral through history, influencing events and consciousness in ways that most people never recognize. Leonardo da Vinci's artistic masterpieces preserve this knowledge for those who understand how to decode their mathematical language. The cathedrals of Europe maintain their architectural encoding of cosmic principles. Secret societies continue their patient work of preservation and gradual revelation. The spiral of the Fibonacci sequence reaches toward infinity while maintaining perfect proportional relationships at every point. Like this mathematical progression, human consciousness can expand toward unlimited potential while preserving harmony with cosmic principles. The choice of whether to embrace this mathematical heritage belongs to each individual and to humanity as a whole. The knowledge awaits those who have developed sufficient wisdom to use it properly. The truth that changes everything isn't just historical revelation about Leonardo da Vinci's connection to the Knights Templar. It's the recognition that the mathematical principles they preserved could transform human civilization in ways that medieval minds could barely imagine. The question isn't whether this knowledge exists. It surrounds us, encoded in art and architecture, preserved in traditions and practices, waiting for recognition. The question is whether we're ready to claim our mathematical birthright and apply cosmic principles to create the world our species was always meant to inhabit.